Peltier or Peltier, martyr or murderer? He's a 42-year-old Sioux Ojibway Indian who's served 10 years of a double life sentence. People now, a lot of people in the Soviet Union, and a lot of people in Canada and the U.S., call you a political prisoner. What does that mean to you?
Well, it's believed somebody that's been in prison for their ideology, somebody that's been convicted falsely.
On the other hand, shooting cops is frowned upon most places, ideology notwithstanding.
Right, I believe it's frowned on all over the world. But we got to remember too now, the agency that we're speaking about right here was not totally innocent of crimes themselves on the reservation.
You know, we have a million stories to tell. I'm just one of a million or more stories that can be told.
My name is Leonard Peltier. I am a Lakota and Anishinaabe. And I'm living in the United States Penitentiary, which is the swiftest growing Indian reservations in the country. I've been in prison since 1976 for an incident that took place on the Ojibway Lakota Nation. There was a shootout between members of the American Indian movement and the FBI and then the local sheriffs, state troopers. Two agents were killed and one Indian was murdered.
Leonard Peltier is a North American Indian extradited from Canada, largely on the basis of fabricated evidence. He was tried in the United States and convicted of the killing of 2 FBI agents in a shootout on a South Dakota reservation 12 years ago. To the American judicial system, Peltier is just a murderer. But big questions remain about FBI tactics during the trial. As a result, a campaign to win Peltier's freedom has involved church and government leaders in many parts of the world.
Not guilty by reasons of self-defense. My case was separated and I was found guilty before a jury of non-Indian people. The prosecutor stated that they did not know who killed their agents, nor did he know what participation Leonard Peltier may have played in it. But someone has to pay for the crime. A lot of nights that I lay in my cell and can't understand why this hell and this terror that I've been going through for 21 years hasn't ended. yet I know in my heart that someone has to pay a sacrifice to make things better for our people. The sacrifice I have made when I really sit down and think about it is nothing compared to what our people of 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 25 years ago made. Some gave their lives. Some had to stand there and watch their children die in their arms. So, I mean, the sacrifice I made is nothing compared to those. I've gone too far now to start backing down. I don't give up. Not until my people are free will I give up. And if I have to sacrifice some more, then I sacrifice some more.
Bring
Still, Peltier maintains that the FBI was just out to get the American Indian movement.
We did find some documentation where once they had the national leadership tied up more or less in the courts and everything, that they were supposed to start concentrating on the people that were below them. And their whole purpose was to destroy the American Indian movement.
Was the FBI. The reservation was Pine Ridge in South Dakota. In 1973, at Wounded Knee, members of the radical American Indian movement took over part of the reservation. It started as a dispute between the AIM Indians and the elected leaders, but soon became an armed confrontation with the American government.
What are you going to do now?
I think we're going to prepare ourselves for the fight that we expected in the beginning.
We have bet our lives that we can make change for the American Indian, whether we live or die.
2 months later, when the occupation ended, 2 Indians were dead, 2 FBI men wounded. But the fighting between Indians continued, and the FBI increased its manpower and firepower around the reservation. Terrorist tactics came to Pine Ridge, and over the next 2 years, 60 Indians were killed. Most of the murders unsolved. get into a gunfight and you're shooting at policemen, whether your bullet actually killed them or not, you're still guilty of murder. You were a part of the gang that killed them.
Well, we were in a gang, for one thing. And secondly, there's a law in this country where you have a right for self-defense. And people believed that they were under attack and they were defending themselves.
And over 250 state troopers, U.S. Marshals, and FBI agents poured into the area, searching for the killers. Peltier fled to Canada. 9 months later, he was arrested in Alberta and taken to Vancouver for an extradition hearing. And already, 60 members of Parliament have signed a petition for a new trial. Among them, former Solicitor Generals Warren Almond and Robert Kaplan.
The information was false. This constitutes a treaty fraud.
New Democrat Jim Fulton thinks the original extradition should be looked at, too.
What I want to occur is to have Mr. Peltier returned so that the extradition proceeding can take place on correct, accurate, verifiable information. If he's then extradited on that basis, then so be it.
The Americans wanted him back. The Indians protested that they wanted him not for murder, but for his politics, and that he would not get a fair trial at home. Nevertheless, Peltier would be extradited, largely on the basis of 2 affidavits from a supposed eyewitness to the shooting. These affidavits were found to be false, but Peltier was sent back anyway. Today, Canada says there was still enough other evidence to order the return. Off.
Yes.
Did you see that happen?
No, I did not. No.
That's what you're convicted of doing?
Yes.
Did you do it?
No. No.
This is Mr. Hansen, the U.S. Marshal's Office in Western Washington.
Peltier was one of 4 Indians charged. By the time he was flown back, 2 of his co-defendants had already been acquitted on the basis of self-defense. Charges had been dropped against a 3rd. Peltier was the last to come to trial. Radical lawyer William Kunstler wants a new trial for his client. He says the agency went too far to win this case.
It's important for a number of reasons. They have 2 dead agents, and they want someone to answer for it. Secondly, there's been a vendetta against the American Indian movement by the FBI. They've replaced the 7th Cavalry as the prime source of discontent on many of the western reservations.
they had to backtrack so many times, it leads one to believe that either they were trying to set somebody up or they're damned incompetent.
They tripped over their feet. That I'll concede. They had too many agents working on the case. They wound up with more paper than they could control. They wound up with more paper than I could control.
5 years ago, the defense got its hands on some of that paper, 12,000 pages of it. One note suggested that Peltier's rifle could not have fired the fatal shots. But the prosecutor disputes that interpretation, and Lynn Crooks says it doesn't matter anyway.
What the law requires us to prove is that this man was a knowing participant in a chain of events which led to 2 dead bodies. We proved that, without that bullet even ever been mentioned.
So far, the courts have agreed.
Deserve martyr status.
Well, we don't want martyr status. We just want a fair trial. Everyone talks about martyr status. We want them to have a fair trial where an independent jury would get all of the evidence, not just that which the FBI wants them to get, while withholding that which exonerates.
Peltier's just won an award from the Human Rights Commission of Spain. In England, Amnesty International and even the Archbishop of Canterbury have called for a new trial. At the federal courthouse in Fargo, North Dakota, Peltier tried to use politics as a defense. But the judge kept it to murder and went by the book.
I did not receive a fair trial. When the government presented evidence that they knew wasn't factual, that's a form of manufacturing evidence. When I was not allowed to properly cross-examine the witnesses, that is another form of not allowing me to defend myself. And that's precisely what happened in that whole trial. day when it came down, I was down into the camp, and I heard some shooting going on up over by the ranch house. Of course, I didn't pay no attention to it because there's a dam close by there about a mile away. I used to hear shooting there. We used to hear shooting there every day. Somebody used to be practicing or with automatic weapons. We think it was some of the goon squads. We don't know for sure. But at first, that's what we thought it was. And then all of a sudden, we heard people screaming and hollering, and so we ran up there. And we seen what was happening. There was a shootout going on. So I ran into the houses because there was little babies there and women and children and stuff like this here. And I got them out of there and told them to get out of there. And by this time we were surrounded, and the shootout lasted for about 11 o'clock that morning till about 7 o'clock that night.
A weekly candlelight service at St. John the Divine Cathedral in New York City. With all the ritual of a high Episcopalian service, the saints' blessings are invoked for what Very Reverend James Morton calls modern-day martyrs.
So that the experience of being in prison is very much a part of the experience of God's people. And so when we think of Leonard in prison, and think of Nelson Mandela today, two men who stand before us as bearing witness, but bearing witness in chains.
Nelson Mandela, jailed in South Africa. Leonard Peltier, doing life in Kansas. It's become a crusade. Free Leonard Peltier. And outside, carved in the stone of a church so large it's second only to St. Peter's in Rome, carved in the very stone, is the face of Leonard Peltier.
Mr. Peltier, I am still here for you. Just to let you know you were down as warrior. United States government is doing you wrong, but the movement has proved this to the U.S. all along. The hidden documents that can free you from your cell. I pray someday you walk out of your living hell. They took most of your life, dirty long knives. To you I fly this kite to let you know I feel your strive. Clinton cheats on his wife, he had no alibi. Promised you a pardon, but they were all white lies. But he gave one to his brother-in-law, that crooked ass bastard. A new millennium and we still slaves to the masters. Peltier to 30 years denied parole. Denied a fair trial, that's just the way it goes. But the beat goes on from our ancestral drums. War painting AKs, devils, here we come. We'll never bow down, Mr. Bush will call you majesty. Peltier's a political prisoner, we demand amnesty and immunity from all my native communities. Together we
It's not a propaganda case. It's a real man who is in prison, and he is innocent.
Task correspondent in Washington, Igor Ignatieff, covers the story.
In my opinion, the case of Leonard Peltier was much more, came very unnoticed here because of reluctance of the American press to write and to look deeply into his case.
Theft, false imprisonment and rape, trespassing, strong arm robbery and hate, kidnapping, slavery.
The Kansas City headquarters for the Leonard Peltier Defense Campaign may be a little shabby, but they've picked up some impressive support.
President's on Commission on Human Rights Council excluded for Spain. I believe we should jump on this.
Genocide reigned on my people like the plague. There's a native on my flag, had my medicine bag, riding shotgun with Leonard and my warrior syndicate. Gonna pick up his check for the wrongful imprisonment. It's a damn shame, isn't it? The justice is filthy. Where's the burden of proof, innocent until proven guilty? Where is all the evidence? Release the hidden documents. You sleep on this land, we're the only true occupants. Placed in concentration, now known reservations. We can't beat them with violence.
What is your position on granting Leonard Peltier, the Native American activist, executive clemency?
Well, I don't have a position I can announce yet. I believe there is a new application for him in there, and when I have time after the election's over, I'm going to review all the remaining executive clemency applications and see what the merits dictate. I will try to do what I think the right thing to do is based on the evidence, and I've never had the time actually to sit down myself and review that case. I know it's very important to a lot of people, maybe on both sides of the issue, and I think I owe it to them to give it an honest look-see. So part of my responsibilities in the last 10 weeks of office after the election will be to review the requests for pardons and executive clemencies and give them a fair hearing, and I pledge to do that.
And you will give an answer in his case?
Oh, yeah. I'll decide one way or the other.
That was President Clinton Election Day 2000, and we know which way he decided. Mass protests by the FBI.
He pardoned Mark Rich.
Explain.
Well, he had a whole bunch of pardons. Mark Rich was a corrupt person involved heavily with Clinton, someone who had been a donor to his campaigns. No question about the rightness of his conviction.
A millionaire financier, fugitive from justice, living in Switzerland.
No support at all for his granting pardon and clemency, and then he denied it to Peltier. He told us, Clinton, within the period before he was going to step down because of the election in 2000, that he would grant clemency to Leonard Peltier. And it was clear that it was the FBI demonstration, and the FBI opposes now. And they have started a letter-writing campaign to Obama saying, do not release him, do not release him. That's why it's so important that your viewers respond, either by going to the Amnesty International site, but by themselves writing to the president.
The best man win. Think about manifest destiny, who gave you the right. Abolish Indian people, hell yeah, we had to fight. Taking us and placing us in your prison camps. Have the nerve to say we're hostile and wipe us off the maps. Enslaving the blacks, took them from their motherland. And messing with the Mexican, that was their other plan. But understand, Mexico, they were all indigenous. And since the beginning of time, man, it's been continuous. I'm a Native American for which it stands. But what it stood for, I wonder if Custer shit his pants. Remember the gold stance, it was murder in the first. We never killed women and children sitting up in church. We were having ceremonies, practicing our religion. Killing the innocent off, is it a government tradition?
The paper claims it has collected 18 million signatures calling for Peltier's release, and they've been sent on to the White House.
I agree somebody did kill the agents.
Stephanie Autumn was Peltier's common-law wife.
I've gone over testimony. I've talked to almost everyone that was there that day, and I know that Leonard is innocent.
That's right. Start to fly, he's hurt, he's in the dirt.
So sometimes they have to kill us. They have to kill us. Because they can't break our spirit. We choose to right to be who we are. We know the difference between the reality of freedom and the illusion. There's a way to live with Earth and a way not to live with Earth. We choose the way of Earth.
There was no political case allowed, and some witnesses did admit they had been coerced by the FBI. But on April 15, 1977, Peltier was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 2 life terms. While Peltier sat in prison, the FBI's conduct was going on trial.
I mean, we see the FBI director is extremely powerful, James Comey, who may have tipped the election for Donald Trump.
Surely. The other thing I want to mention is if it's not done now, President Trump is highly unlikely. Next pardon is 2014. Leonard is sick now. He won't make it to his next pardon. He won't make it through a Trump presidency, I fear.
What word have you gotten from the White House?
No word. Well, we have submitted it to the pardon attorneys who then have to send it on to the president. We understand that it has left the pardon office and is now on the president's desk.
Martin Garbus is one of the country's leading trial lawyers and lead counsel for Leonard Peltier. Norman Patrick Brown is a longtime friend of Leonard Peltier's. He survived the 1975 Pine Ridge shootout. He's joining us from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Martin Garbus, lay out the case. You have asked President Obama or the White House for a pardon for Leonard Peltier.
He was convicted in 1975. He was involved in the shortly after the Wounded Knee shootout. The evidence in the case, acknowledged by the government and acknowledged by the federal judges, is that the FBI does not know who shot the 2 people, that the ballistics do not support the argument that Leonard Peltier did it. The important thing at this time for your listeners is to write to the president. Amnesty International has a site which allows you to join their petition. Over 100,000 people thus far have joined the petition. There are about 300,000 additional letters. So this is a case of a man who's been in jail now for 44 years, 6 years in solitary, a case that one of the judges who presided in the case, the appellate judge, Judge Healy, said that Peltier should be released because of the wrongful conduct of the judge.
And explain what that conduct
was. The wrongful conduct was not producing at the trial the ballistics which show that it could not have been Peltier's gun that did the shooting. The wrongful conduct was, and the government acknowledges at this point, using false affidavits both in the case and to extradite him from Canada where he had been led. In this particular case, 2 other people were charged for the case. conviction, murder, both of those people were found innocent.
And he would have been tried alongside them, but he had fled to Canada.
Yes.
So he was extradited and tried separately.
Yes, but the proof against the other defendants was that it was their guns, et cetera, et cetera. Nonetheless, in part because of the wrongful conduct of the FBI,
and what was that wrongful conduct?
The withholding of ballistics, the refusal. They didn't turn the ballistics over to the U.S. attorney. The other wrongful conduct was it was they who got the false affidavits, acknowledged to be false and found by the court to be false. So the only reason he was convicted was A, the political atmosphere of the time, and two, they succeeded, the government, in having the case tried before a judge, a very anti-Indian judge, rather than the judge who was involved in the acquittal of the other two defendants.
Norman Patrick Brown, you were there that day in Pine Ridge. You survived the 1975 Pine Ridge shootout. Can you describe what happened?
Yeah, I mean, it was a horrific day. It was a tragic day. Well, we lost 3 good men that day, and my role there was as the youngest fighter there of a group of people who were encamped there. We were a spiritual encampment there to protect the Oglala people and traditional people and A members from the brutality of the BIA police goon squad, which were armed and trained by the FBI. To this day, it's been a tough life for many of us. I just want to state that from that day that the agents lost their lives, we've prayed for them continuously, and we feel for their families. And we're not happy about that day. I'm not happy of that day. And you know, I was used as a federal witness. I was coerced. My rights were not respected. My constitutional right to a lawyer. My life was threatened. My mother's life was threatened also, my family. And I basically said some things that were not true. And I have since recanted those statements in court. In fact, the first 2 trials of Dino Butler and Bob Robidoux, Leonard Peltier's co-defendants, one of the lawyers had asked the jurors who was the most believable witness, and they said Norman Brown. And he said, see, Norman, all these years of the suffering and the hardships of your life from this case, it was because of your statement that we created the self-defense statement that acquitted Bob and Dino that day. So, you know, I guess what I did that day is the shooting happened, and I ran up there, and immediately we were surrounded. And we exchanged gunfire, and I was not there at the time that the agents lost their life and Joe lost their life. To this day, I don't want to know, and I do not know. But one thing I want to say, Amy, is that there's this demonization of Leonard as a thug, as a murderous criminal. But that's far from the truth. He's a very kind man. He's a generous man. He's a very funny person. You know, his people knew him as the person that he was. He was very kind-hearted, and that was the reason why he went up to Pine Ridge, because the elders had asked him to lead this effort in protecting the various communities from the murders, from the gunfire, from the beatings that were directed at the American Indian Movement members. So I was a part of that group. There was many of us that were a part of that group.
Norman,
and we knew that why we were there. It was a very
I wanted to ask Martin Garbus about the presence of the FBI on the Pine Ridge Reservation that day.
Well, the United States Civil Rights Commission afterwards concluded that the FBI was an occupying force on the reservation, that they had free reign and were arresting people and beating people. And that was the situation when Wounded Knee started. There's one other thing I'd like to mention. This was the time of Nixon. This was the time of Alexander Haig. And they called out the military. It's called a posse comitatus. They called out the military to shoot at the Wounded Knee Indians who were encircled. So that you had, by the way, President Clinton, we understand, was about to grant clemency. And when that happened, the FBI staged a demonstration outside of the White House, 500 men with guns. First time that has ever been done. Clinton drew back.
We also have to recognize all the ways that the international order has fallen short of its promise. In fact, it is in part because of the failures of governments and powerful elites to squarely address the shortcomings and contradictions of this international order that we now see much of the world threatening to return to an older, a more dangerous, a more brutal way of doing business. So we have to start by admitting that whatever laws may have existed on the books, whatever wonderful pronouncements existed in constitutions, whatever nice words were spoken during these last several decades at international conferences or in the halls of the United Nations, the previous structures of privilege and power and injustice and exploitation never completely went away. They were never fully dislodged. Economic opportunity for all the magnificence of the global economy, all the shining skyscrapers that have transformed the landscape around the world, entire neighborhoods, entire cities, entire regions, entire nations have been bypassed. In other words, for far too many people, the more things have changed, the more things stayed the same. And while globalization and technology have opened up new opportunities, have driven remarkable economic growth in previously struggling parts of the world, globalization has also upended the agricultural and manufacturing sectors in many countries, has also greatly reduced the demand for certain workers, has helped weaken unions and laborers' bargaining power. It's made it easier for capital to avoid tax laws and the regulations of nation states. You can just move billions, trillions of dollars with a tap of a computer key. And the result of all these trends has been an explosion in economic inequality. It's meant that a few dozen individuals control the same amount of wealth as the poorest half of humanity. That's not an exaggeration, that's a statistic. Think about that. In many middle-income and developing countries, New wealth has just tracked the old bad deal that people got because it reinforced or even compounded existing patterns of inequality. The only difference is it created even greater opportunities for corruption on an epic scale. And for once solidly middle-class families in advanced economies like the United States, these trends have meant greater economic insecurity, especially for those who don't have specialized skills, people who were in manufacturing, people working in factories, people working on farms. In every country, just about, the disproportionate economic clout of those at the top has provided these individuals with wildly disproportionate influence on their country's political life and on its media, on what policies are pursued and whose interests end up being ignored. Now, it should be noted that this new international elite, the professional class that supports them, differs in important respects from the ruling aristocracies of old. It includes many who are self-made. It includes champions of meritocracy. And although still mostly white and male, as a group, they reflect a diversity of nationalities and ethnicities that would have not existed 100 years ago. A decent percentage consider themselves liberal in their politics, modern and cosmopolitan in their outlook, unburdened by parochialism or nationalism, or overt racial prejudice or strong religious sentiment. They are equally comfortable in New York or London or Shanghai or Nairobi or Buenos Aires or Johannesburg. Many are sincere and effective in their philanthropy. Some of them count Nelson Mandela among their heroes. Some even supported Barack Obama for the presidency of the United States. And by virtue of my status as a former head of state, some of them consider me as an honorary member of the club. And a politics of fear and resentment and retrenchment began to appear. And that kind of politics is now on the move. It's on a move at a pace that would have seemed unimaginable just a few years ago. I am not being alarmist, I am simply stating the facts. Look around. Strongman politics are ascendant, suddenly, whereby elections and some pretense of democracy are maintained, the form of it, but those in power seek to undermine every institution or norm that gives democracy meaning. Many developing countries now are looking at China's model of authoritarian control combined with mercantilist capitalism as preferable to the messiness of democracy. Who needs free speech as long as the economy is going good? The free press is under attack. Censorship and state control of media is on the rise. Social media, once seen as a mechanism to promote knowledge and understanding and solidarity, has proved to be just as effective promoting hatred and paranoia and propaganda and conspiracy theories. We now stand at a crossroads. A moment in time at which two very different visions of humanity's future compete for the hearts and the minds of citizens around the world. Two different stories, two different narratives about who we are and who we should be. How should we respond? Should we see that wave of hope that we felt with Madiba's release from prison, from the Berlin Wall coming down? Should we see that hope that we had as naive and misguided? Should we understand the last 25 years of global integration as nothing more than a detour from the previous inevitable cycle of history where might makes right and politics is a hostile competition between tribes and races and religions, and nations compete in a zero-sum game, constantly teetering on the edge of conflict until full-blown war breaks out? Is that what we think? History shows how easily people can be convinced to turn on those who look different or worship God in a different way. And history shows that societies which tolerate vast differences in wealth feed resentments and reduce solidarity and actually grow more slowly. And that once people achieve more than mere subsistence, then they're measuring their well-being by how they compare to their neighbors and whether their children can expect to live a better life. And when economic power is concentrated in the hands of the few, history also shows that political power is sure to follow, and that dynamic eats away at democracy. Sometimes it may be straight out corruption, but sometimes it may not involve the exchange of money. It's just folks who are that wealthy get what they want, and it undermines human freedom. Through the testing of ideas and the application of reason and proof, it would be possible to arrive at a basis for common ground. And I should add, for this to work, we have to actually believe in an objective reality. This is another one of these things that I didn't think I had to lecture about. You have to believe in facts. Without facts, there's no basis for cooperation. If I say this is a podium and you say this is an elephant, it's going to be hard for us to cooperate. Unfortunately, too much of politics today seems to reject the very concept of objective truth. People just make stuff up. They just make stuff up. We see it in the growth of state-sponsored propaganda. We see it in internet-driven fabrications. We see it in the blurring of lines between news and entertainment. We see the utter loss of shame among political leaders where they're caught in a lie and they just double down and they lie some more. It used to, look, let me say, politicians have always lied, but it used to be if you caught them lying, they'd be like, oh man. Now they just keep on lying. They just, if you stick to what's true, if you know what's in your heart and you're willing to sacrifice for it, even in the face of overwhelming odds, then it might not happen tomorrow. It might not happen next week. It might not even happen in your lifetime. Things may go backwards for a while, but ultimately, right makes might. Not the other way around. Ultimately, the better story can win out.
God's justice. They are holding up God's light. And together, the truth of God's mercy and the truth of God's justice can be seen by all people. Amen.
Whoever died without a voice, or a prayer, or a hope, or a chance. I'm guilty of standing up for my people's rights. I'm guilty of trying to stop the oppression that I've experienced and I've seen my people experience.
I've gone too far now to start backing down. I don't give up. Not until my people are free will I give up. And if I have to sacrifice some more, then I sacrifice some more.